The atmosphere inside the hall felt unusually dense, as if the air itself had been pressed flat by expectation. This was not a rally, not a campaign stop, and not a casual appearance. This was Barack Obama stepping back into the national conversation at a moment when the country felt unsteady on its feet. Inflation strained households across the nation, social fractures widened daily, and trust in institutions seemed to erode with every headline. People hadn't come for spectacle. They had come because they believed Obama might offer clarity where noise had taken over. As he approached the podium, conversations faded into silence. Phones lowered. Bodies leaned forward. Obama's expression was measured, serious, shaped by years of leadership and the knowledge that words still mattered when spoken carefully. He did not open with applause lines or partisan shots. He spoke instead about pressure, economic pressure, social pressure, moral pressure, and how it had been building slowly, invisibly, until it reached a breaking point. He spoke about families choosing between groceries and rent, about communities retreating into suspicion, about a nation losing its shared sense of reality. His delivery was calm, almost restrained, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. He reminded the audience that crises rarely announce themselves loudly at first. They grow quietly, fed by neglect, misinformation, and the refusal to confront uncomfortable truths. He urged people not to surrender to fear or division, warning that once truth becomes optional, democracy becomes fragile. The room listened intently, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. Obama paused occasionally, letting his words settle. He wasn't lecturing. He was reasoning. He spoke of responsibility, not just of leaders, but of citizens, to question what they're told, to examine claims carefully, and to resist narratives built on distraction rather than substance. There was no nostalgia in his tone, no attempt to relive past victories. This was a warning framed as an invitation, to think more deeply, to listen more critically, and to resist manipulation disguised as certainty. Then, just as the rhythm of his speech settled into focus, the stillness broke. A movement near the front row drew attention. Ivanka Trump rose from her seat abruptly, her posture rigid, her expression fixed with resolve. The shift in energy was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Everyone recognized the moment for what it was, an interruption, deliberate and calculated. She did not wait to be acknowledged. She spoke directly, sharply, accusing Obama of distorting reality, questioning his credibility, and reviving long-discredited doubts about his background and loyalty. The hall tightened. The contrast was stark. Where Obama had spoken about unity and shared responsibility, Ivanka's words cut toward identity and suspicion. It wasn't policy she challenged. It was legitimacy itself. The room held its breath, sensing the collision ahead. Obama did not react instantly. He remained still, hands resting on the podium, eyes steady. In that pause, something shifted. This was no longer just a speech. It was the beginning of a confrontation, one that would force the audience to decide whether volume or truth would carry more weight. Ivanka Trump did not retreat after her interruption. If anything, she seemed emboldened by the reaction it provoked. She stepped further into the open space, her voice steady but edged with accusation, framing her challenge as a defense of forgotten Americans and hard truths others were afraid to say aloud. She accused Obama of speaking from comfort, of offering polished words while everyday people struggled under policies she claimed he had helped normalize. The language was sharp, carefully chosen to provoke doubt rather than debate. She questioned his authority to lecture the country about unity, suggesting that his presidency had deepened divisions instead of healing them. According to her framing, the unrest and economic strain facing the nation were not accidental outcomes, but predictable consequences of leadership disconnected from reality. Each sentence was designed to land cleanly, to sound confident enough that it wouldn't require proof. A few murmurs of agreement surfaced from scattered corners of the room, though most listeners remained silent, unsure how to process what they were witnessing. Obama listened without interruption. He didn't look away, didn't consult notes, didn't signal irritation. His stillness became part of the exchange. When Ivanka finished, she crossed her arms slightly, as if waiting for a reaction rather than a response. The pause that followed felt longer than it was. In that quiet, the weight of the moment grew heavier. The audience wasn't watching a clash of personalities anymore. They were watching two fundamentally different approaches to power collide. When Obama finally spoke, he didn't begin by defending his record. He didn't list achievements or challenge statistics. Instead, he addressed the nature of the accusation itself. He noted how easily frustration can be redirected toward individuals rather than systems, how blame often feels more satisfying than understanding. His tone was calm, but there was a firmness beneath it now, a shift from reflection to resolve. He acknowledged the hardships Ivanka referenced but rejected the idea that complexity could be reduced to a single figure or administration. He explained that leadership meant confronting uncomfortable realities, not repackaging them into convenient villains. Then, with deliberate clarity, he turned the focus back to truth, how it is constructed, how it is distorted, and how quickly it can be weaponized when repetition replaces evidence. The room leaned in again. Obama's words were no longer abstract. They were pointed, though never personal. He spoke about responsibility, not as a slogan, but as an obligation to speak honestly even when dishonesty is louder. He warned that questioning legitimacy without proof erodes trust far faster than policy disagreements ever could. And as he spoke, it became clear that he wasn't merely responding to Ivanka Trump. He was addressing a pattern that had taken root in public discourse. Ivanka's expression tightened. The confidence she had carried moments earlier began to strain under the weight of a response that refused to meet provocation with provocation. Obama wasn't arguing on her terms. He was reframing the entire exchange. The audience sensed it too. This was no longer about who could speak louder or sharper. It was about who could stand on firmer ground. As Obama paused once more, the atmosphere shifted again. The confrontation had moved past accusation and into something deeper, a test of credibility, restraint, and intent. Whatever came next would decide the tone of the room and, for many watching, clarify which version of leadership felt more trustworthy in a moment defined by uncertainty. Obama straightened slightly, not in defiance, but with purpose. The shift was subtle, yet unmistakable. He no longer spoke to Ivanka alone. He spoke to the room, to the broader audience beyond the walls, as though widening the lens of the moment. His voice remained even, but the softness was gone. What replaced it was clarity sharpened by experience. He addressed the idea that hardship requires a villain. He explained how fear often demands a face, someone to blame, someone to accuse, because uncertainty is harder to confront than anger. That instinct, he said, is understandable, but dangerous. When leaders encourage people to distrust facts instead of interrogating them, they trade temporary comfort for long-term damage. He paused, letting that land, before adding that democracy does not fail all at once. It erodes gradually, through habits of distortion that become normalized over time. Obama then did something unexpected. Rather than rebut Ivanka's claims directly, he asked a question, quiet, deliberate, and devastating in its simplicity. He asked how a nation could solve real problems if truth itself was treated as optional. If every inconvenient fact could be dismissed as bias, every expert labeled corrupt, and every institution reduced to suspicion, what remained to guide decision-making? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because it wasn't meant for Ivanka alone. It was meant for everyone listening. He spoke next about power, not the power to command, but the power to influence belief. He warned that when public figures use their platforms to blur reality, the consequences ripple outward, affecting people who never step into political arenas. Families make decisions based on what they're told. Communities respond to narratives they trust. Undermining truth, he said, is not a theoretical act. It shapes lives in real, irreversible ways. Ivanka shifted her stance, uncrossing her arms, then folding them again. The certainty she had projected earlier now seemed constrained, forced to adapt. She attempted to interject, but Obama raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to signal that the thought was not yet complete. The room remained quiet enough to hear the movement of chairs, the faint hum of lights overhead. Obama concluded this portion of his response by returning to responsibility. He stated that leadership is measured not by how effectively one inflames frustration, but by how honestly one addresses it. He said that challenging authority is healthy, even necessary, but challenging reality itself leaves nothing to build upon. His words did not accuse. They defined. And in doing so, they shifted the ground beneath the confrontation. The effect was immediate. The murmurs that had followed Ivanka's earlier remarks did not return. Instead, there was stillness, not imposed, but earned. The audience sensed the recalibration. The exchange had moved beyond confrontation into examination. Ivanka was no longer setting the terms. She was reacting to them. As Obama paused, eyes scanning the room briefly before settling back on her, it became clear that the momentum had changed. What began as a disruption had evolved into a reckoning, not just of arguments, but of approach, intent, and consequence. The next moments would determine whether this confrontation ended in escalation or in exposure. Jasmine Crockett waited until the room settled again. Not because she needed permission, but because timing mattered. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what this moment represented. She did not raise her tone. She did not trade insults. She did not mirror Pam Bondi's aggression. Instead, she did something far more disarming. She returned to first principles. Crockett reminded the chamber that the law is not an abstract idea meant to serve political convenience. It is a living framework meant to protect people who have no access to power, no army of lawyers, no corporate shields. She spoke about accountability not as a slogan, but as a duty. When the law is bent to favor those already insulated by wealth and influence, she said, it stops being justice and becomes privilege disguised as policy. And that, she warned, is how public trust collapses. She looked directly at Bondi, not with anger, but with resolve. Crockett made it clear that national security and economic stability are not excuses to silence oversight or excuse corruption. Strength, she argued, does not come from concentrating power at the top. It comes from enforcing rules evenly, without fear or favoritism. Her words reframed the entire exchange. What Bondi had presented as necessity, Crockett exposed as choice, a choice to protect the powerful instead of serving the public. The room absorbed it. This time, there was no interruption. No murmurs. No shifting defenses. Bondi remained still, her earlier confidence now restrained by the clarity of Crockett's argument. The contrast between them was unmistakable. One relied on authority and volume. The other relied on precision and principle. And in that contrast, the outcome became clear without a vote ever being cast. Crockett ended by reminding her colleagues why they were there. Not to perform loyalty. Not to defend individuals. But to defend the rule of law itself. She said history rarely remembers who spoke the loudest, it remembers who spoke the truth when it mattered most. Then she leaned back, signaling she was finished. The gavel eventually fell, but the moment didn't end there. What lingered was the realization that power can be challenged without chaos, and authority can be confronted without theatrics. Pam Bondi had come prepared to lecture. Jasmine Crockett had come prepared to remind the nation what justice is supposed to look like. And long after the cameras shut off, that distinction remained, not just as a political exchange, but as a warning and a choice. In a system constantly pulled between protecting power and protecting people, moments like this decide which direction the law will lean.